we hear from Timothy, who says, "Look," said Erastus, waving a thick arm toward 5 clients grinning in the atrium of his house. "Look what I can do for your master." When I returned from Thessalonica, Erastus insisted that Silvanus and I move into his house from the smaller one next to the synagogue. Though the offer had been made grandly to all 3 of us, Paul chose to stay in Aquila's shop. "Look what joy it gives me to give my money away." Every morning, when Erastus emerged from his tiny windowless bedroom, he was met by 2 servants, one who laid out his clothes on polished racks in the hall, the other who brushed and washed his body in preparation for the day. Arrayed, adorned, and aromatic, having comforted himself with bread dipped in honey, some dates, some olives, the manager of markets would then proceed to his atrium, where 6 to 12 men, on seeing him, would leap to their feet and cry out his praises. He gave them coins. Or he signaled a servant to give them small baskets of food. Sometimes he invited 2 or 3 of the fellows to follow him on his daily rounds, performing small tasks as they occurred to him. "Look," Erastus said, scattering money among the cringing clients, as he called them. "These men mean nothing to me. They come no nearer my heart than my atrium, yet I accommodate them. But that Paul," he shouted, sweeping open his arms, "Paul I love, fearless Paul, I honor. Who else ever talked to me like him? Your master has a tongue like a shovel. He dug the torment out of my soul. Ah, Timothy, you're too young to know how wonderful it is to be sleeping again. Again, why, I've never slept so soundly in all my life. The vulture that chewed at my liver, that vulture is dead. Oh, my little brother, I want to thank him. I want to lavish thanksgivings upon him. Why does he refuse me and my gifts?" "It's a matter of conscience, I think," I said. "He chooses not to burden those he serves, Erastus." "No burden," bellowed Erastus. "It's no burden at all. I have a house of 7 rooms. I lose nothing to give 1 room away. I gain a guest. I gain the honor." But Paul says the gospel is free. No one should purchase truth. No one can. That's the gift, Erastus. And it comes from God. "Little brother," he declared, thumping the breath from my lungs. "Pretty Greek brother. Paul the apostle's as thin as a whistle. We've got to put some meat on those bones." And so it was that Erastus invited us daily to dinners. And not just us, but everyone he ever met in the company of Paul. There really had been a transformation of this man's life. As a friend and a benefactor, he ceased to distinguish the high from the low, maintaining, however, his own height by his benefactions. Anyone who loved Paul, Erastus loved. Those who believed in Jesus before he did, he loved with even more voluble affections. And those, very few, people whom Paul had baptized, this city official adored with a purple extravagance. By autumn, then, lamps and torches burned far into the night at Erastus's commodious house, since always a goodly number of people accepted his invitations and came. Even in the cooler air, my host heaved about, sweating with happy contentment. Happy Erastus, poor Erastus, more tender than one would suppose. "Timothy," he said one evening when we were alone, "Timothy, tell me." He seized my hand with a blinking appeal. "Did I offend your friend?" He'd never been able to call Silvanus his friend. because Paul's other companion became so laconic. Silvanus didn't talk. Neither did he respond to hugs or kisses. Erastus could handle the silence of those he commanded, but the silence of house guests bewildered him, stumped him. Some days he would pursue the taciturn Silvanus with a constant stream of cheerful chatter. Other days he tried to match him, two mutes moving through the same house. But then, just as the vineyards were starting to ripen, Silvanus absconded. He departed Corinth and the house of Erastus without a word, no explanation, neither thanks nor farewell. Erastus said, "Did he talk to you? Did he tell you why?" Still holding my hand, my huge host drew me down till we were sitting knee to knee on the same bench. Was I too friendly for his taste? Erastus asked. But his eyes unfocused, and he answered his own question. No, a man can never be too friendly. It's always better to err on the side of friendliness. Then he gripped me and drilled me again with his eyes. So what's the matter with Silvanus anyway? Do you know? Does Paul? I'll bet Paul knows. Me too. Tell you what, my little brother, I think the man is carrying a grudge against the world. Maybe he resents polite society. Maybe he never learned how to live in it. Couldn't make the switch to independence the way some of us have, and blames us for our success. In any case, it's better this way. Best he go his way, and we look to the goodness of ours. Timothy, he concluded the talk with another thump to my back. You're as clever a Greek as I've ever met. And who can describe the florid, bright red delight with which this city official welcomed believers to his house for worship and the celebration of the Lord's Supper? We never stopped worshiping at Titius's house. Aquila and Prisca still shepherded believers in that place, but when Crispus, ruler of the synagogue next door, came over announcing his new faith in Jesus, most of the God-fearing Gentiles followed him. So the synagogue was draining souls. Titius's dining rooms were flooding, and the dining rooms of Erastus, manager of markets in Corinth, now caught the overflow. His was a completely genuine hospitality. In gorgeous dress, he himself, not his servants, led slaves through his atrium and into the intimate halls of his house. Slaves, whether educated or crude, day laborers, beggars, sailors, bakers, bankers, people of no name, people invisible to the world, people inglorious, everyone. He said, "The Lord be with you," to all of them. In the accents of the highborn, his full lips giving the words a luscious splendor, he said, "The Lord be with you." And then he kissed everyone, bearing forever upon his brow the mark of apoplectic gladness. This is the man who was ready to drag the body of Paul, bound and helpless, out of town behind his horse. I watched the pleasure with which he dragged believers to his private apartments, and I grinned at the transition. And still we grew. Still our glorious Lord granted increase to our preaching, so that by winter the leadership of those who worshipped in Erastus's house was bequeathed to me. We couldn't even fit in 2 houses anymore. Paul had found a man whose house was built at the base of the Acrocorinth. In fact, he found the man on account of his house. It was a mansion twice as large as Erastus's. Moreover, according to Paul, that mansion sat at the very gates of idolatry. Paul had passed it regularly for 9 months, since regularly, all alone, he climbed the road up the grim colossal rock that can swallow our winter sun. One afternoon, suddenly he turned aside. He knocked on the outer door of the mansion and asked for the name of the owner. "Gaius," said a maidservant. "May I meet with Gaius?" Paul asked. The servant said that her master was at the baths. So then my master and friend went himself directly to the baths east of the Lycaeum road, and, still the Jew, wandered fully clothed through the room of tepid pools into the room of steam and the hottest water, where he found Gaius stretched out under the ministrations of a servant who was scraping the sweat from his flesh with a curved blade. Paul sat down beside him and said, "Are you Gaius? Do you own the house between the city and the north foot of the Acrocorinth?" In January, then, believers began to meet in that house too. And so there were 3 churches in Corinth. Though Prisca and Aquila shared the role, she was the more prominent shepherd in that church that met at Titius's. Her public prayers and her prophecy were the much more powerful, edifying the lowliest, encouraging the discouraged, consoling the disconsolate. And though I was the ostensible leader of the church that met at Erastus's, it was the personality of our resplendent host that dominated. Erastus's, he was enchanted by the practice of speaking in tongues. Whenever anyone was moved to do so, Erastus raised his great arms and applauded approval. He prayed constantly that the Holy Spirit would grant him the same gift, which in fact the Holy Spirit withheld until Paul and I had left Corinth. But that's another story for another time. Unlike the softer, more intelligible exchanges at Titius's, ours became a most clamorous body of worshipers. But despite his noise and joy and his continuing hospitality, Erastus missed Paul's presence at the Holy Meal. Ever since Paul began to lead worship at the house of the man named Gaius, a man incidentally whose status had been received by inheritance, not earned by wit and work, Erastus had grabbed me for nighttime conversations on his examination bench. "How is Paul? How is the disciple? Does he like it at Gaius's place? How many people do you think are gathering there these days? Fewer than here, probably. It takes time for new things to grow." One balmy evening in March, Erastus came home from a dinner engagement at another house, his poor cheeks trembling with emotion. He took my hand and led me to the bench and sat and struggled for several minutes to talk. "Timothy," he said. The act of speech brought tears to his eyes. He covered his face with his fat hands. His shoulders heaved up and down. Then into the hollow of his hands he said, "Paul the Apostle. They told me tonight that Paul the Apostle, he baptized Gaius. Yes, and his whole family, Timothy. Timothy, why didn't he baptize me?" What happened afterward was altogether Paul's conceiving. I did nothing more than mention how dashed were the spirits of Erastus. 4 weeks later, in April, 1 month before the celebration of the Isthmian Games, early in the morning, as Erastus and I entered his atrium to meet his clients, we were surprised to find but one man standing there, my skinny friend, meatless Paul of the moon-sized head, his red lips sly with grinning, his small eyes laughing, his whole self directed at Erastus like a bee at a blossom. Beside him on the floor was an enormous canvas, folded.